since we are talking about enrollment growth, I'm going to look at this through the lens of retention, okay? Enrollment management, retention is an important part of enrollment management. And so we're going to spend some time, just a little bit of time, looking at some theoretical foundations. So I'm going to talk about retention briefly, and then we're going to zero in on engagement, because I'm old enough to remember Alexander Aston. Maybe somebody in the crowd does too. And we'll talk just briefly about his theory of involvement. Frankly, we're all in the student engagement business. We're trying to keep students invested psychologically in what they're doing in our courses, in our degree programs. And so this notion of engagement is really important. And if any of you have ever taken an online class, a completely online class, I mean, think about a webinar. Think about, what is it about that webinar that keeps you focused and engaged, as opposed to non-engaged, not, just kind of mailing it in. So we're going to talk about some innovations that that help in that regard. This notion of change is really important. All of our systems in our organizations are at some level of equilibrium. Even though you think maybe things may be unsettled, things generally kind of settle in. And so when we're trying to affect change with regard to student enrollments, we want to increase retention, which I'd say is pretty much a universal want, a desire. We're talking about how we're going to disequilibrate the system. So there's some structured ways to do that, and we're going to talk briefly about that. In the middle, spaces. So the way I frame this presentation out is there are ways to influence and increase engagement in the online course space. So that's, think about the micro level. And then there's some aspects of the campus space, the overall space, and that can serve to enhance the levels of engagement. And these two, of course, are mutually reinforcing. So we'll spend some time talking about spaces. And then finally, we'll talk about resources, organization and exemplars. These are, like everything we do in higher education is, we need to have the resources. And so we're not just going to talk about dough. We're not going to talk about just money. We're going to talk about technology a little bit. This is not a tech-heavy presentation, but we are going to address technology to a certain extent. A little bit about personnel. If any of you have ever tried to take a class that was face-to-face and then redesign it for a completely online environment, you know that it does take time and it takes some resources and some specialized skills.